You want to do a podcast?
Is that what we're doing?
That might be what we're here for.
Man, these always sneak up on me.
Totally.
I should one of these days learn to do some research or something.
They're only friendly for as long as you're cooperating. It was probably just a whole bunch of Benny Hill music going on when they started talking about patch management. The only thing worse than not having a network map is having a network map that is wrong. Today is February 8th, 2015, and this is episode 105 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as always, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Hey, good evening, Mr. Bell. How are you, sir?
I am excellent. How are you?
I'm good. I'm loving this early spring weather we're having in Atlanta today. It's beautiful.
It is awesome.
I actually went outside and it was nice.
Absolutely.
So that's a good thing. And for those of you who are in crap weather, I'm sorry.
Yep. Move south. Or not. Anyway.
Whatever.
Yeah, whatever.
Whatever makes you happy.
So just a reminder, the thoughts and opinions we express on this podcast are ours and do not represent those of our employers. So yeah, jumping in, I kind of reordered a little bit. The big news in the past week, obviously, is Anthem. And we have a story here from the Huffington Post, which I think may be the first time we have ever had a Huffington Post story. But whatever. If you disagree with it, start your own podcast, right? So, ouch.
I'm just gonna bite my tongue.
Yeah. So anyhow, again, this is all of the rage right now. Apparently, Anthem was breached by some as yet unknown attackers, possibly China. We're hearing.
Wait, not North Korea? I'm so confused.
Well, what can I say?
But clearly, because it was a big hack, it must be a nation state. It couldn't possibly have been anything else.
True. That's very true.
Yeah, and that was a bit of sarcasm, if you couldn't tell.
So the story here is that an Anthem system administrator was apparently poking around or doing something and saw his own security credentials logged into a system and doing some kind of job and recognized that was not appropriate, and that set off apparently a chain of investigation, and the results are that apparently 80 million records, or the records of 80 million customers, possibly have been breached. So there's still not a ton of detail, but apparently what we do know is that Anthem is saying that there were 5 employee credentials, or the credentials of 5 employees, apparently including the one who found this, were stolen. And it's further down in this story, it says that there apparently has been some evidence of some kind of activity happening as far back as December 10th.
Which, coincidentally, is also the date that the website anthemfacts.com was registered.
Yeah. I love a good conspiracy theory as much as anybody. Brian Krebs did a little bit of investigation on that and said that he found that it was actually being used to host a site about mental health.
Well,
So-
I had heard, that's interesting. I had heard that it was originally being used, that Anthem had rebranded from WellPoint.
Yes, that's right.
And it was part of the rebrand, and that the Google cache for it looked like it. So I am being a little facetious throwing it out here. I think it's been disproven that this was some sort of, they knew about it since the 10th, December 10th, and they stood up the site, and it didn't announce till now. However, it's been floating around out there. A lot of people were talking about it on Twitter, so I did want to at least quickly throw it out there and say I'm pretty sure that is just one of those odd coincidences that is not actually a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, and there is an oddity in this particular story that I hadn't seen in other stories, and I may not, obviously I haven't read everything, but I'll just paraphrase, or I'll read it actually. Those earlier attempts, including the one on December 10th, were deflected by the company's network security defenses, Bin said.
So that leads me to think that they're looking through logs and saw some other probes or attempted infiltrations that, for whatever reason, failed.
Right. So, and it kind of makes me wonder, were those inside the network? Were they on the perimeter of the network? What exactly did they see? Obviously, that we don't have that kind of detail here, but I think to me, it says that apparently the data existed, and it just wasn't being acted on or monitored or recognized as a problem at the time.
Well, it's interesting too that unlike a lot of companies, this was actually self-identified, that
Yes.
their own DBA stumbled upon this. Now, to be fair, or to be harsh about it, I would call this a bit of a lucky find that you just happen to have an attentive DBA noticing something out of the ordinary, not as such any sort of security system
Right.
flagging this activity and alerting and triggering an internal investigation. So they kind of got lucky here. And to your point, although, again, we've both read the book The Signal of the Noise, and it very clearly makes the point that when you look at things in retrospect, it looks very obvious. But when you're going through it, it is much less obvious. So it's easy for us to armchair quarterback them. Why didn't they notice? But this is something we've seen over and over and over again in companies. We, as an industry, are doing a terrible job of spotting active infiltrations when they're inside the environment, even though we have the data once we go looking for it.
That's a really good point. But again, I think the Signal and the Noise, the lesson from that book is very material. It's easy to go back in retrospect and see and connect the dots, right? But it can be difficult at the time, and that is where I think that's the opportunity ahead of us. How do we get better at that? There's some other interesting things. For instance, there's an obvious question of we apparently Anthem is acting as if this data has been breached, and what's not entirely clear is did that data actually get exfiltrated? Because the context is interesting here, right? The person saw some activity going on, right? So which means they were actively doing something in the network. I guess the question I have is, they're saying there are 80 million customers impacted. Are there more customers that weren't yet impacted? That's kind of where my head is going. What else could they have done, or what more were they likely to have been doing?
So what I heard and is that the particular database had up to 80 million customer records.
Okay.
And so what my understanding is they're not sure how many of those records were actually accessed and exfiltrated. And obviously there was some sort of running process going on that database that was noted by the DBA. So what was that process? Don't know. They haven't told us. We don't know what exactly they grabbed. But however, if they had already grabbed the entire 80 million records, it's likely they would not have been actively accessing that database any further. So I think it's a fair supposition to say they didn't get all the records. But what did they get? We don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
And I guess you almost have to assume they got them all until you know otherwise.
And maybe that's the point here. Maybe that's they're taking a conservative position. In addition to them self-identifying this issue, they also didn't really sit on the information for very long. It was detected on January 27th, and I think it was disclosed publicly on, what was that, the 4th of February? So that's just a little over a week.
Yeah, I think so. I'll confirm as we're talking here.
So I think Obviously it's not a great situation for anybody, especially I'm one of the people probably who had their data stolen, so not terribly happy about that. The other big bit of controversy about this is that I think there's been a supposition, at least, that the data was not encrypted, and so there's a whole lot of noise going on right now about how horrible it is for for Anthem to not have encrypted their data. But the reality is, I'm not sure that that's a reasonable situation.
Let's talk through that for just a moment.
Absolutely.
And we just talked about this in the last show, or was it the one previous? So let's say it was completely encrypted. Whoever the attacker was had valid DBA credentials. So that encryption would have happily decrypted for that user transparently. So I'm not sure that is what we're talking about here that would have done anything. Having that stuff encrypted in a data at rest environment would have helped them if somebody had come and physically stolen the drives that data lived on. But if I'm a valid administrator, obviously I've got to work with that data. So obviously there is some sort of encryption decryption mechanism built into that environment.
Yeah.
So perhaps that's not the real concern. Maybe the real concern is what could they have done to better secure those privileged accounts?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess where my mind was going too is I'm not sure that we have enough information to say that it wasn't encrypted for the very reason that you mentioned, right? Because if it was encrypted, and they obviously had valid administrator credentials, it's not a logical leap to think that they would be able to, either post hoc decrypt it or decrypt it as part of whatever exfiltration they were doing. So,
yeah, I think that criticism is probably those who don't understand all the mechanisms, how they work together, and thinking of encryption as a panacea to these sorts of problems.
Yeah, I agree. And I will. You kind of touched on it too. This definitely highlights the point that we've got to do a much better job about securing our administrative credentials.
And there are tools out there. There are vendors out there that's all they do. So, I mean, there are solutions to this. It is just something that I don't know that it's high up the food chain for a lot of folks to worry about right now. But we do see a lot of abuse of privilege accounts and service accounts. And there are tools anywhere from, vaulting passwords so that they change all the time. There are solutions like watching where administrators are coming from and looking for out of the ordinary sources for those logins, out of the ordinary times for those logins. There are different approaches.
Mm-hmm.
We try not to talk about specific technology vendors on this show, but I do want to at least bring up some techniques that I've seen. If this is some of your real sensitive information, you probably need to be doing some research around how better can you secure access to that data.
Yeah, definitely.
We got into a bit of debate over the weekend about attribution on Twitter. And, one of the points I kept making is I don't care who's attacking me. I care what they're attacking.
Right.
Right. And I want to defend my crown jewels, not, care about, I'm only going to defend it if it's the nation state.
Yeah. I do think it is important and maybe conflated in the argument somehow is having an understanding of the ways in which different people attack you, right? So being cognizant that there are very different attack vectors. I agree, though. It doesn't matter to me. If I'm Anthem, it doesn't matter to me if it was a nation state or if it was organized crime. All I know is I lost a whole bunch of data.
Yeah, very true.
So, and it is important to understand for us as security people, but also I think even more fundamentally, this is something that I'm actually considering a talk about at B-Sides Atlanta, for our IT architects to have an understanding of attack techniques, because I really think that there's often just a complete misunderstanding of how secure things are, and the kinds of attacks that kind of our basic building blocks of IT these days can be used against us.
Indeed. And it's a tough call, to get folks to think that way, especially when they're trying to build out stuff quickly for business. But if we don't shift that mindset and start thinking about security and failure of security controls early when we're building this stuff, we're just going to keep seeing these over and over and over again. And I don't think it's a panacea to just go, well, know how attackers work and you can build in it. But again, we're just trying to raise the bar here and trying to architect enough things that make it difficult and also make it noisy and make enough odd things happen that hopefully we've got enough monitoring systems to catch it, because I don't think we're going to keep them out all the time. What we're trying to do is, like having a front door with a lock on it. You want to make somebody slow down, make noise, and give you time to react, in theory.
Yep.
But it's not easy. A lot of folks are just trying to, get the packets through the network.
Right. So moving on to our next story. This one comes from Tech World, and the title is Dating Site Topface Pays Hacker Who Stole 20 Million Credentials. So this is another case where essentially a company has capitulated and paid. It's not really a ransom. So the story here is that apparently Topface is a Russian dating site, apparently a quite popular one. And some of their data showed up on an online marketplace. And a US-based security company called Easy Security or Easy Solutions found the data and contacted Topface. Topface then turned around and contacted the person selling it and said, hey, why don't you talk to us rather than selling this to somebody else? And so that apparently happened. Topface paid some undisclosed amount of money, and the attacker withdrew the information that was for sale. What's really interesting here is that apparently it was primarily email addresses that were stolen. They're saying that they didn't get any passwords. Now, I don't know if that means they didn't get any clear text passwords or passwords of any kind. And it also said that most of these people, I think 95% they said, are logging in with social media accounts. So like, Twitter and Facebook through their OAuth, I guess. So in the end, it seems like they're trying to cast this as the attacker was kind of a bug bounty, or a bug hunter. So this is one that I really hadn't seen treated like this before, and I guess it worked out for them. But man, the systemic problems that are created when people do stuff like this is not good.
Yeah, we kind of went through this phase, I think, back, 10, 15 years ago when people were doing, let's just say, unauthorized security audits.
Right.
Especially against websites, and then contacting those companies. I think that it's a tough call when you're in the situation. As we've seen with CryptoLocker and CryptoWall and that sort of thing, a lot of individuals and companies are choosing to pay, but I think we're probably in agreement that is not a precedent you want to set.
Yeah. And
it's going to make it harder for everybody else. But, it's a difficult situation when they're in it.
Yeah, and I guess, one of the, it's we've often said, it's better to think about these things through ahead of time. So one of the, to me, one of the things this points out is it probably behooves everyone to think through, are there circumstances where you would pay, or are you just never going to pay? And think through that, maybe some of the different high level categories, and so you're not having to figure that out when you're under the gun.
Yeah, I would agree 100%. Of course, that's a really awkward conversation to have with your leadership.
Yes, indeed.
But if you can, we would recommend it.
That's right. All right, so moving on to our next story. This one is from Security Week, and the title is Disconnected Security Increases Risk. This one started off this article started off in a way that I really liked, but then it kind of went weird. So,
Okay.
so I guess the gist of it is that, we talk about we security people talk about the challenges of human nature as it pertains to security, primarily in the context of users, users doing dumb things like clicking on dumb links and opening dumb emails and doing dumb things generally. But the point is that as IT people, we are also prone to making dumb mistakes. And so he goes through some of the dumb mistakes, like, letting ourselves become overloaded with events out of some of our monitoring systems, and then shutting them off, and things of that nature, and not working enough to have the technology kind of complement us, and rather just see it as an unbearable workload and turn it off. And this kind of fits the narrative we see a lot, where we buy with all well intentions security technology that then atrophies because we don't have the commitment to properly tune it, and so it's it becomes a liability, and eventually it becomes ignored.
Yep.
So this is actually another one of the talks that I'm thinking about for B-Sides, and that's we humans are very susceptible to what are called economic irrationalities, and I think this kind of points out in a very narrow way some of those things, but I think that that problem goes much more deeply than this article does. So stay tuned.
Well, I think there's a couple things that occur to me on this. Is that you have to know why you're purchasing some bit of technology or security control or whatnot, and you need to understand your motivation behind it. And so what I think happens a lot is people buy it and they forget what it was that motivated that original purchase, and some other conflicting requirement or need starts to come into play. And often that conflicting requirement or need sort of wins because security often is in the way. And so I'll give you an example. We buy a firewall, we turn on the IPS and other cool features, and it starts introducing latency into the environment, so we turn that off. All right. Well, why did we buy that functionality to begin with in the first place? Oh, well, we had these needs we were trying to do, and we had this risk we were trying to mitigate, and we couldn't afford this risk tolerance without it. Okay, so now you're giving yourself two choices. Either re-accept the risk or add latency and disruption of services on the environment, which of course is not going to fly. I would argue, wait, why did we not size the firewall properly to begin with?
Right.
In terms of making sure that we can achieve both choices here, right? Both needs. Another one I see all the time is technology is purchased, but there isn't a plan for who's going to administer and run that technology long term. And it may be a pet project to somebody. It's up and running for a little while, then that person leaves or they get retasked, and then that technology starts to atrophy. I think we do a vast disservice to ourselves by not staffing appropriately to handle the care and feeding of these technologies, and also holistically see how they match up with other things, and having an architectural view from a security architect view of how all these different pieces fit together. And I think and I've said this many times, it can create a false sense of security for instance, you've got an IPS out there, but you're using it in an offline mode or out of line mode, and it's monitoring only, and nobody's actually really updating the various settings, and nobody's really looking at the alerts too much, and yet somebody in an executive suite says, "Oh, well, we've got an IPS out there," and they don't know all the caveats behind that.
Right.
And a lot of times we see that companies have the right technology, they're just not running it properly.
Right.
And then the technology gets a bad name. So this is not trivial. This is not easy. This is, this also goes into, we do have a shortage of security folks, and I mean that both at a security technology engineering layer, folks who can run IPSs and firewalls and SIMs and all that kind of jazz, and at an architecture and, holistic security layer. We don't have a lot of those folks. But it is a problem. And I think when we buy technologies and don't think about the amount of time it takes to run and care and feed for these technologies, we're actually doing ourselves more harm than if we had just not bought the technology at all.
I completely agree with that. But at the same time, though, in my personal experience, and I'm sure others as well, is vendors tend not to help that problem out, right?
Oh, that's so true. They absolutely downplay the amount of time it takes to run them.
And I think that honestly is a big challenge, because it's especially the more expensive the solution, generally the higher up the chain the decisions are being made, and the farther from the operational groups that decision maker is. And if you've got a vendor saying, look, this this farm of next generation firewalls just runs itself, that the headcount doesn't get factored into the equation. And by the way, I don't think this is necessarily unique to security. When I ran IT, I saw the same thing on business applications. When you go off and buy Oracle Financials, they're not very upfront about how many people you need. You need to buy a busload of programmers. That doesn't appear anywhere in the discussion.
I would say, I think it's incumbent upon us when we're looking to purchase these technologies as part of the POC to really evaluate what sort of, at least estimate on our own side, what it's going to take to run an organization. And ideally, we can talk to folks who are running it out there already today, which, by the way, this is a challenge when you're looking at bleeding edge technology. Typically that pool of knowledge and previous experience doesn't exist. So that's something to be said for looking at more mature technology that has been around for a while. You can usually talk to folks and figure out, what does it really take in production. There's usually folks talking about it online, that sort of thing.
I think that's a really important point. Whenever you're going off on some new endeavor like this, to go out and find some other organizations that have deployed it and find out what their experience has been and what kind of resources specifically does it take to keep it up to date and to manage it, because I think that's such a critical and often overlooked part of the equation when we're building these security programs that we need to get better there. So anyhow, moving on to our next story. This is just a brief update on Sony. So in Sony's most recent earnings announcement, they've effectively said that the cost of their breach is expected to cost $35 million, which, when you consider the totality of everything that happened, that seems like a bargain.
Yeah, it's not bad. And I wonder how much of that will be covered by their insurance.
I wouldn't imagine more than a little bit. So, although, I do wonder what kind of exemptions they might have for acts of terrorism or what have you. So, more to come there, but it's an interesting number. And I guess I just heard too that the co-chairperson, I forget her name, resigned. So, I suspect it's probably hard when all of your email gets leaked and people see that you're maybe unkind.
Yeah, that didn't do her any help there.
Yep. Anyway, so moving on to our next story. And this one comes from CSO, and the title is Malicious Advertisements on Major Sites Compromised Many Computers. We've talked about this kind of thing quite a lot, but it keeps happening, and it's happening with increased frequency. And, I think this just reiterates the point that, the internet's a hostile place. It's not that pornography sites are hostile or where sites are hostile. The internet generally is kind of a dangerous place. And so basically what's happening here is legitimate ad networks are being attacked, and I use the word attacked in quotes, by some attackers who are effectively buying legitimate ad space and then redirecting the unwitting visitors to ultimately to an exploit kit. And most of the ad networks have some pretty good diligence they do when they vet ads to make sure this doesn't happen. But the bad guys are pretty good at circumventing that. They'll set up an algorithm so that only every 10th person gets redirected, or it doesn't start happening for several days after the ad starts running, or things like that. One thing that's not really clear to me, though, is whether these ads are, the malicious code is being presented in the ad, or if it relies on the person actually clicking on the ad.
I've heard both. I've heard primarily that it is malicious in the iframe of the ad, is the one that I typically see out there.
Okay.
So it's merely visiting the site that's presenting the malicious ad.
That's not great.
No, it's not good.
Not good.
Especially we saw recently with Flash being used as a mechanism for exploitation. And typically I'd say we'll use a ad blocker. Well, one of the most popular ad blockers on the planet, AdBlock Plus, basically it became very widely known in the last week that they take money to whitelist certain advertisers.
They sold out, is what you're saying.
And and that's kind of frustrating.
Yeah.
So that hurts you in terms of using that as a defense here. Now there are other ones out there, but AdBlock Plus is one of the best known and assumed to be one of the best supported in terms of doing a good job of finding and blocking ads. But now you're in a situation where if somebody is able to co-opt one of these white-listed advertising campaigns, even the AdBlock Plus will not help you.
Yeah, so obviously this is not a good thing, and we all need to figure out how to prevent it, because most of us allow some forms of web browsing in our employers. And again, the problem here is that almost no matter how narrow you let your employee, the kinds of sites you let your employees visit, it's almost assured that you're going to allow something that could be a problem. Right now, there's a couple of important considerations that most of the time, in every case that I'm familiar with, ultimately the malicious code is coming from another domain, right? And so you have an opportunity there with web filtering to block that. And we've talked about it in the past. One of the easiest ways to do that is to block uncategorized sites, which tend to be new. But even that, the more sophisticated criminals out there know how to get around that. They can work to get those sites, at least for some period of time, categorized with with something benign. So another one, which is kind of draconian, is either a pure whitelist or something like NoScript.
Yep. But NoScript is a pain in the ass to run.
Let's
just be fair.
Oh yeah.
But yes.
That's why I called it draconian. Absolutely. But it is a pain in the ass. But so is CryptoLocker, and cleaning off malware from hundreds or thousands of workstations. So, and by cleaning, I mean rebuilding.
You're not wrong.
So, I think, especially in the context of what we talked about, right? If you've got administrators, and this is going back into a philosophical point, right? I see so often organizations who rule their general user population with an iron fist. And, you can't go to most websites, you don't have administrative rights, and on and on and on, right? And then the IT people are granted a lot of latitude. You have administrator rights, you have a more lenient web filtering, web filtering setup and stuff like that. And these are the people who also have administrator rights.
I am guilty of this problem.
So, I'm not familiar with really any companies that don't do that. So, and I don't think it's a particular. I'm not singling anybody out. Let's just say that.
No. I it's a common thing, and I agree with you because I'm seeing it myself in my own life.
Where's the risk, right? Anyway. And I think in times gone by, we may have had, and maybe it was right, maybe it was wrong, a sense that the average IT person would do a better job of staying away from risky things, risky activities. But now I think, especially like this, right, the story right here kind of points out that it's almost impossible for anybody to avoid, unless you have some kind of a control in place. So,
well, and you thought it out properly, right? For instance, one thing that I'm a big fan of, though we don't talk about it much, is, hey, for your IT folks, give them both a admin account and a non-admin account. One thing Windows doesn't do well that Linux does very well is this concept of sudo, where you're not running as root all the time, but you can easily invoke something as a root command if you need to. And in Windows, I think 99% of the time, we don't need to be running as admin. But occasionally, the reason why these IT folks do is because they do need to load random crap. And, I work as a security architect, so my build on my desktop is very different than the vast majority of the organization. So, yeah, the IT guys say, here, you know what you're doing. You can improve it yourself. You know the risk. But if I wanted to architect it properly, I probably would have my normal everyday account, which is non-administrative, and then also the ability to log in as admin and load programs and change things and bounce back to non-admin.
Yeah, I think more and more there's a recognition that you have to minimally do that, but even that is, I think, problematic. Where I'm at is that even if you do that, you still have to put, in my mind, bumpers around what people can do, right? Okay, fine, you need admin rights, but what are you going to do? What else are you going to do to make sure that they don't hose themselves?
Yeah, that's true. So, I think it's a good point, and maybe that in of itself is a a business opportunity to build products that are technical controls around keeping the admins from doing silly things.
That's right. And I think as time goes on, just to be be philosophical for a second, I really think that this is an area where IT security is going to be maturing in the near future.
I hope you're right.
So, because we're going to keep seeing things like Anthem. I'm not saying that that's what happened at Anthem, but we've seen a whole bunch of other cases. And I think we're going to keep seeing it. So, anyhow, moving on to our next and last story, which comes from CSO also, and the title is CrowdStrike demonstrates how attackers wiped the data from the machines at Sony. And boy, I went into this article all excited that I was going to learn how Sony's computers were wiped, and then I find out that they're going to have a webinar in 2 weeks.
So basically, we're giving them a free ad right now.
Yeah, whatever. The reason I included this is not because I'm going to go watch their webinar. I thought there was some interesting discussion points in here, and so basically, the author of the story is interviewing somebody from CrowdStrike about what happened at Sony and how can you avoid that. And they pointed out some important things, which kind of goes back to the conversation we had over the weekend on Twitter. And I would say one of the fundamental points is that most attackers nowadays are using malware, and so looking for malware specifically is not all that sexy, I guess, as a defensive tactic. What you really want to do is look at kind of the end-to-end tactics that are used, which kind of goes back to what I was saying. I think it's just another way of describing the concept of understanding how attackers are attacking, right? And figuring out how that happens. How are these attackers doing it? And I don't think generally there's a huge amount of variance between them. I mean, I've seen a bunch, right? And Bob has seen even more, and we compare notes. And there's a lot of what I would say very well worn paths in this space. So that's I think that's an important point. They do talk about the concept of assuming that your network is breached, and I really like that. The more I think about it, the more I like it. And there was a discussion on another podcast about, well, isn't that really defeatist? And how horrible is it that? And should we just take our ball and go home? And that's not the point at all. It's a thought exercise. If you sit down and say, okay, I am going to assume that there is somebody inside my network. How do I find them? That's the point. Okay, I got all this technology crap. I got all this monitoring crap, and I need to go find them. I know they're there. How do I find them? And that's the point. And I think that is a really valuable thing for each of us to consider. And that is the number one takeaway from this article. So,
yeah, I can't disagree with any of that. I very much agree with that. I often say, to various organizations, if you're not actively working an investigation, you're probably missing a breach.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it's not defeatist. It's reality. It is. To think that your defenses are adequate would fly in the face of all the evidence we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years.
Well, and exactly. And I think the further point is to stop taking solace that the detective things that you have in place are not flashing and buzzing. Take a step back and say, okay, I know that somebody's in here, right? And it's not triggering my alerts. And how do I go find them? Is that mining my data? Is that, getting a data scientist? Is that, there's an infinite number of possibilities to go do this, but it's changing the mindset. It's at least for some period of time entering a different mindset of saying, okay, I'm going to take a step back from this pure defense kind of role and say, okay, they're in there, they're in here. How do I go find them with the tools that I have? And that, maybe there aren't anybody in there, and that's great. Hopefully not. But I think when you play that out, you're going to find, one, you might find something bad, and that would be good. And two, you'll probably find opportunities to improve your operations and your visibility. So that's why I think it's valuable.
Yeah, I think so too. And it can be something that can be frustrating to your organization and your leadership to think about it that way. So I would say be careful how you communicate this and nuance it. But yeah, I think that you've got to assume that there's likely some stuff going on that you're missing.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was the show. Yeehaw.
Indeed. And just a reminder, B-Sides Atlanta for the folks in the Atlanta area or would like to travel to our first city is coming up in March 14th. It's a Saturday. I think Jerry and I are both submitting talks. Don't know if they'll be accepted or not, but we're certainly going to submit, and I'll be attending either way. So that will likely be our next appearance at a SecurityCon. So come see us. Say hello.
Absolutely, and it's unknown yet whether or not they will let me smash fruit Gallagher style. I don't know.
Well, I think if you label them as APTs and you're smashing APTs.
No. I got it all planned out. They're going to be named vulnerabilities. Poodle, Shell Shock, Ghost, Heartbleed.
That's awesome.
We're going at it.
Are you going to have different hammers that are labeled as different nation states?
Oh, I like it. I hadn't thought of that. That's a great idea. Wow. I was just thinking of the Cybermatic 5000.
And we didn't talk about this in Anthem right away, by the way, but things are already flowing around that, it must be China. Once again, just for the record, a lot of this stuff is not that tough for random people to do, guys.
Yeah. But again, oh boy, I'm gonna disparage Mandiant, and I don't want to do that. So maybe I'll just cut it off.
Yeah, well, nothing about Mandiant or anything else. Just saying that I have yet to see anything that is attributed to a nation state that couldn't be done by smart, small group of people.
Yeah, and I think here's one of the, and this is the philosophy section of the podcast.
Let me nuance that statement. I take it back.
Okay.
With the exception of something like Stuxnet, which was targeted at very specific, rare technology in terms of the industrial controls, right? But when we're talking about, in general, Windows, Linux type attacks, that is not out of the realm of smart individuals.
Yeah. One of the significant challenges we have is the secrecy or the confidentiality with which all of these investigations happen under. It's really rare that we get enough information to actually make our own informed judgment, right? So
True.
we're kind of stuck saying, or understanding that, I think in this particular case, it was reported that there were two unknown pieces of unknown malware or malware that is not publicly for sale, or I don't remember exactly how it was phrased in one of the reports I read. Those are, it's those kinds of details we really don't have access to generally. They kind of dribble out, and they're always, attributed to a source familiar with the investigation, and then you get, a PR person come out and say, "Oh, we never said that," and you don't know what the heck is real and what's not. So, but I think fundamentally, I agree with you that it's naive to think that the kinds of attacks we're seeing, whether it was Sony or Anthem, with the caveat that we don't fully understand what the heck happened at Anthem yet. These are not things that are out of the grasp of many kind of armchair attackers who have time and determination.
Yeah, I would agree. And, when it comes down to 0 days and that kind of stuff, I know plenty of people who develop 0 days on their own time. And they're not nation states, folks.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
It's not that difficult. I mean, yeah, it's not.
exactly.
It's look, it is a rare and obscure arcane skill, but it's not something that's out of the grasp of sharp people.
Right. You know,
And it's not. Go ahead.
I guess the one thing I will say, but possibly a difference, possibly this goes in the other direction, is, what's the motivation? When you think about it from the perspective of a traditional crime, you always look for the motivation. You have the means, motive, and opportunity. And so I think what we're saying is that the means and the opportunity are available to a great many people, not just nation states. But I guess the question is, is there a significant intersection of people who have a motive to do that? Because it's even though it's accessible, it's conceptually within the reach of people who are not nation states. Are they generally going to be interested in expending the effort to do that?
If there's a lot of money to be made, sure.
Right.
And we know of very large, vast criminal organizations out of Eastern Europe and Russia that happily do this stuff for a living.
And so I guess the question is, is this, if it does happen, does it portend that there is an economy for these kinds of targeted attacks done kind of on a commercial private sector side for a price? And because I kind of think that says, in my mind at least, if it isn't originated by a nation state, that's probably the next most logical conclusion, right?
Right.
But anyhow,
well,
I mean, we're totally speculating. So
yeah, but it's an important speculation because what I'm trying to say is don't believe instantly that when people say, well, it must have been a nation state. I disagree with that statement. I don't think that's true.
Yeah, no, always
in the vast majority of cases.
Right. Yeah, I think we have to consider the alternatives, because especially if that tells you, or if that makes some kind of a change in how you view your response or what your obligations are to protect your data. I think that's that's where it gets dangerous, because otherwise it's just talk, right? But if it starts to influence how you act, I think that's where it gets more dangerous. So, anyhow, good discussion.
Indeed.
And by the way, there was an interesting discussion. Dave Vitale was on the Risky Business podcast, and he was talking about North Korea and whatnot. He had an interesting take. I would encourage. I'm not going to go through it because it was kind of a long discussion. But if you have the time and interest, go listen to that. It was the episode that was released last week. So, with that, there was one other thing I wanted to mention, that I'm just wrapping up a book that I've really enjoyed. It has taken me forever and a day to read, and it is I want to get the exact title right here. The title is Measuring and Managing Information Risk: A Fair Approach. So FAIR is the factor analysis of information risk. It's a quantitative approach to risk assessments, or measuring risk and whatnot in a quantitative way, i.e., putting dollar signs to it. It's really interesting. It's a very, very long book. Kind of makes you think pretty deeply about this. So if you're interested, give it a read. It's good. It's a good read.
All righty. Sounds good.
All right. Well, that is the show for this week. We hope you have enjoyed it. And if you have any questions or ideas, send us an email to info@defensivesecurity.org. You can find links to all the stories we've talked about tonight on our website at www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow Mr. Kellett on Twitter at Lurg, and you can follow me on Twitter at MaliciousLink. And with that, we will talk again next week.
Take care, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Nice.
Oh, wow.
I like it. Let's do some more of that.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.